Hello everyone and welcome back to an Infinity N5 initial reaction for Bakunin. Bakunin isn't a sectorial I've played a whole season of, but it's a sectorial I've fiddled with for a while, played a lot against, and generally feel like I have a grasp of. N5's looking to be pretty exciting, so before we jump in, let's take a look at some context. So what defines Bakunin? Bakunin's defined by the wide range of units it has available to it, that makes it hard for the opponent to know what a Bakunin player is going to bring to the table. Their units are generally quite cheap for the value they bring, where units like Moderators, Riot Girls, and Morlocks pack a lot of punch for the points they cost. They've also got quite good pure cores compared to their sister factions. The Riot Girl core and the Nun core wildly outclass what Tunguska or Corregidor can make in terms of a pure core. Unfortunately, Bakunin generally lacks strong long-range guns in the active turn, where the Nun HMG and Taskmaster rocket launcher are pretty common picks to push through. Additionally, white noise isn't as much of a given as it is in Corregidor or Tunguska, where you might have to work a bit more in your list building to get it in there efficiently. In N4, Bakunin came out of the Link Team changes pretty well. In N4, Bakunin came out of the Link Team changes pretty well, where the Riot Girl core kept most of its bonuses and could still take Fiddler and Avicenna while maintaining its purity. As the edition went on, new units furthered their unpredictability in options, where they got some buffs with the reinforcements, and also got the observance rework that made a large part of the sectorial functional again. By the end of N4, Bakunin was fairly feared as a sectorial, and was generally considered top 5 or top 10 sectorials in the game. Now that we understand where we're coming from, let's take a look at Bakunin in N5. Alright, and here we are in Infinity Army. We've got jurisdictional command of Bakunin, unlimited duos, a Harris, and a core. And we can see that really the fire team lists haven't changed that much. The Moderators team now has the addition of the Tag Treba. It doesn't really have any increased or decreased AVAs compared to N4. The Reverend Fire team has also stayed the same, as has the Observance and Riot Girls Fire team. The Taskmaster Fire team stayed the same, as well as I believe the Armored Fire team as well. You can take 2 Vostoks if you want now. Which is interesting, but I'm not sure if it really has any grasp on the wider sectorial. Alright, so looking now to the Moderators for Bakunin. We're still keeping the very cheap price point, with the Boarding Shotgun EM Carbine being my pick if you're just taking a basic Moderator, though you will probably want the Combi Rifle to hide your Lieutenant choice. We've kept the Paramedic and the Hacker, as well as the Pitcher, which I'd say were the most important ones to have. You've lost some things like the Sniper Rifle and such, and the Grenade Launcher, but I don't think that has a great impact on the wider sectorial. Moderators are still excellent. You're still going to be taking them quite a lot for the Moderators Fire team. Nothing much to be said. Now, the Red Sky crew were an addition pretty late into N4, and are largely there to service the armored fire teams where they can duo quite well with the Stig or the Lizard. They're still pretty similar to how they were at the end of N4. Their points have pretty much stayed the same, which seems to be common with a lot of the reinforcements profiles, being the design direction CB was more pushing in. Mars Spiders are still quite good. They're not going to be harassing or anything like that. You can't do a pure duo, but they're still going to be quite good engineers. The Rounders had a big glow-up with the multi-marksman rifle. Before it was a shock marksman rifle, and the multi-ammo is a big deal. Marksmanship has been nerfed a bit in the albedo changes, where albedo now presents a number that acts as mimetism but for visors and marksmanship, of which the Rounder has both. The Red Fury also got discounted by half a SWIC, which is also quite nice. They've also got boarding pistols. Now, boarding pistols take the naming convention from the boarding shotgun and put down a circular template where they hit. It's a bit of a buff to their damage, but not something I see bringing a huge amount of, I guess, value to the profile. It's nice to have for the marksman rifle and the Red Fury, but doesn't bring much to the conversation with the hacker. And let's be frank, you weren't taking the boarding shotgun anyway. The Dactaris haven't really changed at all. Unfortunately, you can't really link them in Bakunin. So, oh well. But Clockmakers are a bit more interesting. Clockmakers have the moderator keyword, where keywords and purity are the name of the game in N5 Fireteams, and have a couple interesting bits. They've got a piece of deployable cover, which I don't see being incredibly useful without a mine layer or such, and the armed turret, which could be good as the second part of an order you're just throwing out, but it is getting a bit expensive at 21 points. I think it's definitely a bit of a buff to the Clockmaker in having a bit more utility they can bring to the table, where they do fit quite well into a moderator's fire team. But how much you'll be using these special profiles, I'm not too sure. The Tag Treba is one of the new models that has a tag comm, which is essentially a rem driver, but for tags. Dodge +3 and +1 on the gizmo kit's pretty decent. I don't really know how often you're going to be gizmo kitting your tag, unless you are bringing that Clockmaker with the +1 burst. The way gizmo kits work now in Lynx, with the 0.5 or special dice, it's going to get discarded. So it's not like in 4 where you could pretty reliably shoot 2 darts into something and be confident that that can get that up. So the Lizard Pilot has a submachine gun emitter and a gizmo kit and can go into these fire teams. And it's a bit uninspiring compared to the other options. The Salamander Pilot had quite a good killer hacking device, and the Gator Pilot from Corregidor had a pretty noticeable buff to the Gator. So the Lizard Pilot, not too hot on it. It's fine. Now on to Uhahu. She hasn't changed much at all. Same price, same swick, same stat line. But what has changed for Uhahu is pitchers. Pitchers now have a grenade launcher range band, which means you're no longer getting that +3 range band to put them down. And with the burst change with the fire teams, you're now only ever shooting 1 pitcher instead of the 2. This is a nerf to your active turn hacking and your pitcher game, but Uhahu still strikes quite strong as a no-wound incapacitation hacker with pitchers who can fit in pretty well with your Tinbot Riot Girls. Zoe and Noelle up next, and they've got a beautiful gizmo kit +1 burst, which is going to become more relevant in this edition. And it looks like they've maybe got... the price hasn't really changed. You're still getting a pitcher on Noelle, and a repeater. But, yeah, I don't know. I don't think you saw Zoe and Pywell an incredible amount in the previous edition. They were great during ITS 14 with the flashbot buffs. And although they haven't gone down many points, generally points have gone down across the board, so you might get a bit more room to fit these guys in. The gizmo kit +1 burst is pretty attractive too. Avicenna hasn't changed much, except we see the new rule immunity arm, which is sort of morphed out of bioimmunity and total immunity. So total immunity has been split and means that any saves impacting your armor stat, you're immune to. So an explosive save, you just take 1, you're immune to AP, that sort of thing. Avicenna's nanopulsar has probably gone up a little bit in usefulness, considering the shotgun changes. So she's quite good to put next to that Riot Girl shotgun as a template option if you need it. Fiddler's strangely gone up a point, and is still going to be as excellent as she was in the N4 edition. But what is worth noting now is due to the fireteam changes, if you are putting this Riot Girl pure core together, you're not going to get that ballistic skill 16 that you're used to. You're now just capped at that +1 ballistics 14. Does this mean the Riot Girl team is bad by any stretch of the imagination? Absolutely not. with ballistic skill going down across the board, I do still expect the Riot Girl team to be quite good, especially where they have more resilience than the Observance Fire team. I think the Observance Fire team may suffer a bit more. Orcors haven't changed at all, and Orphans haven't really changed either. They've kept the Mimetism, and I'm a big fan of the multi-marksman rifle profile and the engineering profiles. They've picked up a boarding pistol, which I don't think is going to change too much for them. They're still going to be the same role they're in, either with the multi-marksman rifle heading up a very cheap moderator Harris, or following around one of your tags with the engineer profile. The Initiated are also keeping that fantastic deployable repeater profile, and getting a +1 burst breaker pistol, which I don't think they had earlier. Again, we haven't really seen much of a points change in this regard. They have gone down a bit, but not by an incredible amount. Then the Prowlers. I always thought Prowlers were a bit of a sleeper pick. I quite like the Spitfire Nanopulsar, particularly as kind of a one-man fire team. Picking up the Disco Baller is also pretty nice. Bakunin doesn't tend to be shooting through white noises or smoke as much as the other factions, so having that Eclipse Zone, I think Bakunin probably appreciates that the most. But I wager if you're going to see any, you'll probably see the Spitfire version. The Silenced Pistol is a new bit of kit as well that complements the Spitfire range bands. And Immunity Arm is nice. But at the end of the day, 36 is still quite a decent amount of points. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be surprised if the Prowler was relatively untaken as well, in N5 as well. Then we've got the Sin Eater, who I think is extremely interesting. With the move to N5 and Link team changes, I'm predicting that Neurocinetic and Total Reaction bots are going to become a lot more popular as ballistic skill goes down and arrows in Link teams become harder to put up in that respect. The Sin Eater's also had about a 10 point discount on most of his profiles. The Sin Eater Marksmanship Multi-Sniper I still think is going to be the pick of the bunch at the reduced SWIC with Marksmanship. Although you'd now be suffering from Albedo, that doesn't appear to be widespread, and just going back to your flat ballistic skill with Mim, it's still quite good. I like the Mach 12 quite a bit as well as a zero SWIC option, though we'll talk about another zero SWIC option a bit later as well. I think this is great in any mission with an objective room where the Mach 12 can shine, or if you can put it watching the halfway line, I think it's pretty fantastic. And I think the Sin Eater is something you're going to have to watch out for, and something you should consider to start putting in your lists. Alright, the Reverend Moiras. They've stayed mostly the same as well, except they've picked up Sixth Sense, which is pretty interesting. So Sixth Sense has been de-nested into 2 skills now, where Sixth Sense essentially keeps the part that doesn't help you against surprise attack, where if you're shot at, you can shoot back and that sort of thing. I think that's probably the best part to keep, and lets a Moira avoid getting smoke shot, which they're otherwise pretty susceptible to, with an MSV2 model already presenting quite a threat. I think while the Moira team and the Riot Girl team were quite similar in power level in N4, I think with the ballistic skill going down, that's also bringing down your Reverend Moira's protection, where they can be more easily face-to-face. I think the Reverend team is going to suffer a bit, and you're going to see a lot more Cenobites as Overwatch pieces rather than the Moiras. It is worth noting, though, that the Reverend Fire team hasn't changed much outside of that, and still brings a lot of the utility that the Riot Girl team can't bring. Reverend Healers haven't changed a whole bunch. The Medkit +1 burst is probably, quite good. Unfortunately, they're still pretty well outshined by Mother Healer, Agatha, Wadabara. Frenzy has changed a little bit as well, but I think, if you're picking a healer, you're going to pick Mother Agatha. The Vulcan Shotgun and Pulsar +1 burst is quite nice. Now the Custodiers, they haven't changed much, except for the pitcher availability. Well, not availability, how pitchers work now, being that they've lost that +3 range band. The Reverend Custodiers being able to be buffed to a BS13 makes their pitchers one of the more reliable ones in Bakunin, but your active turn kind of hacking or guided strategy, if you do that, is a bit less reliable. Riot Girls remain quite strong and pick up Combat Instinct, which protects them against surprise attack and such. So they're still going to be quite good to put in that full core, as they'll be pretty indiscernible from the previous core they were in, except lowering of that ballistic stat, no longer getting the +3. The boarding shotgun firewall is quite nice to have kept, as is the missile launcher and Spitfire, but the multi-rifle disco baller is actually quite an interesting profile. Usually you would just want to have that smoke around to drop templates with the boarding shotgun or pop shots through with the Spitfire, especially if you're in that full core. But the disco baller is interesting where, as I said before, I think it brings more value to Bakunin than the other sectorials. The Taskmaster is pretty interesting. It's got a new strategic deployment profile. I'm not sure how much that really changes for you. And they've also changed some of the rules with the making irregular things regular with the new Fireteam Master rule, which makes Morlocks, Zellenkriegers, and Connolly all regular if they're in a team with the Taskmaster. His stat line hasn't changed much at all. He's gotten a teeny weeny bit cheaper, and I think the heavy rocket launcher is still the profile you'll want to be taking with him. The strategic deployment's interesting. I just don't know if you want to be paying that much for a Red Fury that, otherwise I think the Rounder's using that better. So I think the heavy rocket launcher is still the way to go. The Penitent hasn't changed much either, except of course for the beautiful continuous damage Red Fury. It is only ballistics 13, damage 13, but that's quite nice. Even more nice, though, is the continuous damage AP Spitfire. We saw the Penitent Observant kind of come in N4, get messed around with a bit, and then sort of pushed back out after not really reaching the heights of much else around it. It was competing pretty directly with the Taskmaster, where the Taskmaster had the added utility of turning those Morlocks regular. I think you're going to see it a lot more in N5 as kind of a tag buster. Bakunin can struggle with heavy armor quite a bit, so if you can get this AP Spitfire, and this one's quite nice because it makes the pistol continuous damage as well, I think that's quite strong. The EM grenade launchers, I think it's funny, I enjoy using it, but I think the AP Spitfire, if it wasn't where it already was at, is definitely where it's at now. Alright, Cenobites. They're still here, they're still excellent, except they've lost Impetuous, and they've gotten a bit more expensive. It is actually significantly more expensive, and I think this is going to have an impact on the Reverend's fire team. There has been a little bit of points dropping in other places, but the way the points are falling now, I think it's going to have a big impact. I think this is another reason N5 is going to push you more towards that Riot Girl team instead of the Reverend's fire team. They're still good. They've gotten a point of ballistics as well, which is relevant. I think if they were still ballistics 11, it would be pretty hard to make use of them, considering the changes to the fire teams. And you're probably putting up this heavy rocket launcher just with how fragile the rest of the Reverends are now that they've lost that ballistics. The Demonist was a bit of a weird profile in N4. You didn't really have room for it, and it was basically just there for the Lieutenant +1 order. I still don't know if its cost is going to justify taking it, it doesn't really bring... I don't think it brings that much value to your list besides an extra order, and I think frankly you're paying far too much for that. You do have some good NCOs in the Moira heavy machine gun and in the Rounder. It is possible you can manage to fit this in with the water level kind of lowering regarding points, but I don't know, I think there's still quite a bit more you could do with those points where the Demoness doesn't live up to those heights. Robin Hook hasn't changed an incredible amount either. She's got the immunity enhanced, which is the new total immunity. And she's still kind of your running around repeater. She's got an emitter now, which is nice. She's kept the drop bear, so she's good for those templates. 20 points was around where she was in the previous edition, and she just kind of got muscled out by the other excellent options you have in Bakunin. I don't see her having a resurgence or anything like that. She can now stick in the, the armored fire teams, but I don't think that changes much for her. Next is the Lizard, who hasn't changed an incredible amount either, but has gotten a decent bit cheaper. Having a repeater on board is also quite nice, and I think you'll be gravitating more towards the heavy machine gun profiles. It's a pretty decent buff, and does draw Bakunin a bit more into taking their tag. Your pilot isn't fantastic, but dodging on a 14, you're not going to complain about that. All around, pretty solid. Yeah, I don't know if there's much more to be said. It's looking like tags are going to be pretty cheap in N5. And I wouldn't be surprised if they had an uptick in popularity. The repeater already being on board the Lizard would draw me to take the Mars Spider a bit more over the Orphan personally. But, I mean, look, it looks quite good. All the tags have the new Robo Medical Attendant Robbybot, who's your new kind of onboard specialist with a new peripheral and ciliary rule. Your tag just kind of deploys them, and you can spend orders to run around with that and press objectives. It's not a massive change from the old pilots, other than that they don't have to get out of the tag and expose themselves in that way, but that was a pretty minor trifle. Next, the Stigmata hasn't changed an incredible amount either. Getting a +1 burst on the heavy flamethrowers quite nice, especially with how double templates are going to be a bit rarer in this edition. The Stigmata was pretty excellent in a majority of the missions, I'd say, and I think it's going to continue to be excellent. Stempler's on now as attack-aware profile. It's okay. It can't link, which is a bit disappointing, but if you got the points to upgrade it, it's quite nice. And now the reaction's on, which is what I was talking about regarding a zero SWIC option. Everyone's reaction bots now get the Thunderbolt +1 burst, which is essentially a burst 3 heavy machine gun. It's a significant points and SWIC drop, and I think it's going to be quite popular, especially where, as I said before with the Sin Eater, I think these kind of more dedicated arrow pieces are gonna become more popular. Now the Vertigo's on. Your guided game has changed quite a bit. Spotlight now inflicts a save, but is burst 2. So your active turn spotlighting is quite a bit better than your reactive spotlighting now. Additionally, the reset is now face-to-face against the missile when it gets shot. So the guided strategy is quite a bit less efficient, and I think less efficient mainly due to the pitcher changes discussed earlier. It's going to be a lot less guaranteed to get those pitchers down when you were shooting 2 of them in one order in a +3 range. Now you're shooting one essentially on a coin flip. Reactive guided, it's still probably pretty similar, but good players weren't really walking into your repeaters anyway. Bakunin wasn't massive on the active turn guided strategy, so I don't think it's going to impact them as much as, say, Corregidor, but it's something to be aware of. The Meteor Zond is still here and is still excellent. It has the new super jump jet propulsion, as well as an EM carbine profile, which is pretty attractive. The boarding shotgun's still the cheaper one, but I think the EM carbine is good to have a mess around with. The Meteor Zond, it's frankly fantastic. I think it's going to continue to be fantastic. Nothing much has really changed around it to lead me to believe it wouldn't be. Transductor Zonds are Transductor Zonds, as are Cyclones, who have had a bit of a points drop but otherwise stayed largely the same. Interestingly, I think they're going to be your most efficient pitcher from now on, because they can shoot into that 32-inch range band. The way baggage works now is that it's also an automatic reload at the start of your turn, meaning that you can be shooting out pitchers with the Cyclone often, with it being in your deployment zone, where usually you'd be moving your pitcher throwers up to get into that +3 range. And it has gone down a fair bit. Corregidor would usually run a EvoBot pretty regularly. I don't really think that was the case for Bakunin, but could be a more interesting space to explore with the Cyclone maybe getting some added value. The Lunacar's had some changes, but ultimately I think is still too expensive to field. It's got that forward deployment +4, which brings a lot more value to its Mine-Laid, Crazy Koalas, and Heavy Shotgun, Heavy Flamethrower profile, while you are wasting a lot of points on the Heavy Shotgun and Heavy Flamethrower in N4. It's actually become quite good in N5. The Thunderbolt profile is also interesting in replacing the Acrylite Cannon. If you are bringing that Evo Hacker, might be nice to have a shot with. The Move 8-2 is really nice with the Heavy Shotgun. I'm just not sure if this has added enough value to justify the cost, especially where everything else has sort of gotten cheaper. That might make room, or that might further drag you away to something else. The Vostok's also had a significant change, where its FTO profile, which is the only one Bakunin can link, loses its onboard repeater, and also loses a point of damage on the Mach 12. I don't really think that's as relevant, but has got a large discount on both profiles. The repeater is the big loss here. The 1 damage on the Mach 12 is whatever, but the points discount's really nice, especially as it stays a 0 SWIC option. The Vostok wasn't really as popular in Bakunin as it was in Corregidor. It also wasn't very popular in Tunguska, but I'd be interested to see if the lower points and being a good sort of midfield piece makes it, I don't know, a bit more highly taken. An issue you are going to run into, though, is link bonuses, where you'll have to be putting it with some cheap moderators. I mean, a Clockmaker and a pitcher moderator with a Vostok sounds pretty decent to me. So while Bakunin, maybe it wasn't very popular in Bakunin may actually have the best linking options in giving that Vostok an additional burst, while also keeping some utility at a pretty great price. Next up we have the Zeros, who also haven't changed an incredible amount. Zeros were always pretty solid in N4, and were very cheap lean profiles. They've stayed that way in N5, and they don't really have anything new to discuss. The mine layer, I think, has gotten a bit worse in some ways with the para mine, but the shock mine is still available. The para mine's interesting, maybe to set up a fork on a tag or something like that, and it's just another option, but I'd still be sticking with that shock mine when you're putting him down in the first place. And now Bran Ducastro. Bran was extremely good in Infinity N4. He was essentially a no-wound in-cap Fide that your opponent could put just outside your deployment zone, where he infiltrated on a 16. He's gotten a decent bit worse, where his infiltration is Fizz 16, meaning he's now over-infiltrating on a 13, which is significantly worse than previously. He's gone down quite a lot of points, though, and he's still pretty quick, Whether or not it's worth taking Bran, I think from the reduced points cost, it could be. I think he's pretty comfortable to have in your deployment zone as someone who can re-camo and quickly grab objectives. The EM grenades is pretty brutal to add to his profile for the infiltration, but without templates now, he is less of a threat and less of an issue. Morlocks are still excellent. They've got the no cover rule, which is denested from Impetuous, where no cover means they can't gain cover even if they're in a fire team. They haven't changed an incredible amount. I think the biggest change is that the smoke grenade launcher costs you 0 SWIC. I think a pretty decent combination will be the Taskmaster, a Morlock with smoke grenades and your favorite, and then a Morlock with a smoke grenade launcher. Shooting 2 smoke grenades on 10s is pretty good and pretty consistent. So I can actually see the smoke grenade launcher getting quite a lot of play, and I would be pretty excited about that personally. Now I've got the Uberfall Commando, who retains the enhanced immunity, and now doesn't have a choice as to how many pups they take, but a little bit of a reduction in 19. They've lost martial arts, but they're still quite good in close combat. CC attack -3, natural born warrior. You're still punking a lot of non-CC units and still making CC units nervous about getting into contact with you. Pupniks are still frankly excellent. Still kept that amazing dodge and giving that Chimera more saves with that viral weapon. It's pretty brutal. Zenlin Kriegers are still here and they're fine. One thing to know is that Berserk is no longer face-to-face. It is a pretty decent nerf to them. And they've also got that no cover rule. I don't think Zenlin Kriegers were really your pick in Bakunin anyway. Maybe if you had a couple more points to upgrade a Murloc, but I'd really be trying to upgrade that Morlock to the smoke grenade launcher now. They've kept the extreme Zenlin Krieger, who I don't think really had any popularity in Bakunin, where you already had extensive options. Demna's here as well, and he's basically unchanged. And then there's Wolfgang, who's had quite a big change, where he now has continuous damage and immunity arm. I think he's quite good. He's had quite a nice glow up. I just don't know if there's a place for him in Bakunin. Overall, I think Bakunin has come into N5 a little weaker off, but has probably sunk down with the water level and won't be particularly disadvantaged. I think where before the Reverend Fire team and the Riot Girl Fire team were relatively equal, I think the Riot Girls Fire team has probably pulled ahead in that race. Having such cheap moderators really helps you pump out some decent duo bonuses in your larger fire teams, but they don't provide a decent duo in themselves. Riot Girls can put out an okay duo in something like a missile launcher and a Spitfire, but then you're really lacking more of the utility that you can drag along. I think the biggest winner, I don't know. I think unlike Corregidor or Tunguska, you don't have a large amount of good duos. I think you're more looking at Harris's and cores regarding duo bonuses. And unfortunately, you don't really have the keywords to make anything stick. I think Bakunin's definitely going to suffer the most coming into N5 compared to the other Nomad sectorials. Are they still going to be good? I think so. But I don't think you're going to be at the same pace regarding your duos and regarding your bonuses. Is this the fall from grace people have been begging for Bakunin? Maybe. Again, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in another video soon. Thank you.